Welcome, everyone, to Talia Tuesday on the Blueprint Podcast, where we dive deep into the realms of confidence and assertiveness with our co-host, Talia Bombola. As a licensed marriage and family therapist and specialist in confidence and assertiveness, Talia brings a wealth of expertise and insights to our discussions. Join us each Tuesday as we explore practical strategies, personal anecdotes, and empowering advice to help you cultivate the confidence and assertiveness you need to thrive in all aspects of life. Get ready to unlock your full potential and build the life you desire with Talia and Jason as your guides. Talia, what is the difference between an avoidant and a narcissist?
So off the top, avoidant attachment is not a diagnosis. Narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosis. And only trained clinical professionals who are in the room assessing the person who allegedly has the traits are skilled and qualified enough to make that diagnosis. Sorry to everybody on Instagram. Not everyone's ex is a narcissist. So that's the first differentiator between the two. It's very important that we differentiate that. When you're looking at an avoidant attachment, that usually stems, at least from the analytic view, from childhood and the quality of the relationships with your primary caregivers, namely your parents, but whoever took care of you the most. Avoidant attachment develops when your needs were not met consistently, and the internal narrative that you took from that was, I guess I'll have to do it myself. People are not reliable or trustworthy, at least not consistently enough for me to feel like it's worth the risk to do. So I will keep to myself. I will be more of an island. I won't get that close to people. I would feel more comfortable sometimes meeting the needs of others than having to have others need me or to rely on them. So that is usually the avoidant attachment system. Usually can also be like cousins with emotional avoidance or emotional unavailability, because if we start to avoid our primary caregivers, or we don't get close to them, or they don't get close to us, and thus the avoidant attachment system develops, chances are we also were not modeled how to have emotions, what emotions to have, or how to regulate them. This is not always the case, by the way, but that is a separate system. Like the emotional avoidance is separate. It's again close to, but separate from avoidant attachment. And avoidant attachment is something that develops typically in childhood. Attachment styles can change over time. They are malleable. They are flexible. We're not talking like leaps and bounds, but if your person puts in a lot of work and they didn't have too trauma laden of a childhood, there is good prognosis that they can change and become earned secure attachment, meaning the tendencies of the previous attachment style will still be there, but they won't flare up as much, and the person will be mostly secure. So it would seem like 80 to 90% secure. But if something got triggered, they would tend towards the avoidant. So that's like a synopsis on avoidant attachment. Narcissism, true narcissistic personality disorder, is a personality disorder, and it is what we call in the therapy community ego-syntonic. Personality disorders are ego-syntonic. Most all of them are borderlines, on the borderline. They do not cause distress to the person who has it. They cause distress to the person who is around the person who has it. So when you look at separate diagnoses like anxiety and depression, usually the person who has it is suffering, and sometimes the people around them are suffering, either because of the person's lack of capabilities, or they're emotional and they care about the person and they don't want to see the person they love in pain. When you're looking at personality disorders, specifically narcissism, the narcissist, the person who is diagnosed with this disorder, does not know that there is something afoot with how they are. They think that's how it should be. Why would I change? If you have a problem, you change. I'm not going to change. There is a lack of awareness or in turning inward of accountability that what they are doing is causing harm to others. And in fact, depending on the type or subtype of narcissism, the very reason that it is causing harm is why they end up doing it, because they get some sort of gratification for it. So when we're looking at it in the therapy room, the most dangerous kind of narcissism to treat is malignant narcissism. So when you're looking at the theory that all of us have narcissistic traits, it's how well they're integrated or not that would delineate an actual personality disorder diagnosis versus just that person is exhibiting like signs of being full of themselves. Not everybody who is self-involved has a personality disorder. And there's a difference between unhealthy narcissism and healthy narcissism. Healthy narcissism is about individuality. It's about having a self that is cohesive and sustainable over time, and that you develop as the years go on and as different cycles of your life happen. You are able to break apart and then be cohesive again. So you know that you have a self and you know that others exist, and you have self-confidence more than narcissism. When you're looking at a narcissistically secure self, so somebody who relies on the validation or the external validation or praise of others to feel like a sense of self, how well they are cohesive or feeling like a sense of continuity is dependent on how they are received, nurtured, or individualized by the people that they're around. So it's less about them as a self knowing this, and it's more about, I'm okay if you're okay. And that's where we look at what's going on underneath the reason why people struggle with narcissistic personality disorder. There's a huge list of diagnostic criteria. If you so want to look at it, you can Google it yourself. However, not qualified unless you're trained to make the diagnosis. When you're looking at the reason why it exists, there is a defense against low self-esteem. There's a defense against pain. There's a defense against not enoughness. And the narcissistic self, or that self state, develops out of that feeling of not enoughness to protect the true self, the authentic self underneath, from that pain. So that's also why people who have narcissistic personality disorder often go for, are attractive to, people who have codependent tendencies, because when you're looking at what gets you to 0 and using the human magnet syndrome, if I'm at a -5 or closer to that with codependency, I'm far more likely to be, again, attracted to or attractive to somebody who thinks they're amazing, because I might want some of those traits, but it's all a facade for both. There's a huge difference between avoidant attachment styles and narcissistic personality disorder. That's just a brief overview of what the difference is.
I do want to add on to that a little bit. I've seen a lot of videos on social media recently speaking more about the narcissist being able to heal their narcissism and then ultimately be in connection with others. And I'm curious what your response to that would be.
I think I'm bringing cat heat for this. The only narcissist that I would say type or subtype that eventually does heal would be the more somatic narcissist, because gravity and what would be the other word? Like the sun for so long. Like, you can get as much plastic surgery as you want till a point. You can do as much filler or surgery or enhancement as you want to a point before, again, age just takes us all over. That if the person is more of a somatic narcissist and they get their worth or their validation from what they look like, they will have to come to terms with that eventually when time, like the passage of time, hits them. But for the other types, I would be very skeptical, because, again, the very nature of true narcissistic personality disorder, the diagnosed kind, I don't have a problem, you have a problem. So they're very unlikely to self-report to therapy if they're perfect. Why would they need to go to therapy? And they are often the ones who go to therapy in a couple relationship, which is directly contraindicated for couples therapy, because what is shared in couples therapy is supposed to be vulnerable. And when you're with somebody who is a narcissist, they will use that against you, and it's a form of emotional abuse. So we don't tend to work with people who have unapologetically, like, flaming narcissistic personality disorder where they're actively hurting their spouse. That would be not indicated to treat them. It doesn't mean that the partner shouldn't be treated, but to work with them as a couple, you'd have to refer to somebody very highly skilled in that. And there are other people who realize they're full of themselves, or they realize it's a defense, so there's more insight, but I would be wary to even give them the diagnosis of a personality disorder, because sometimes that can be just a defense, or it's like an unintegrated narcissistic personality trait, which does not make a diagnosis. So I think if we're describing it in that sense, then yes, people can go to therapy and change and integrate. But if we're talking about the full-blown, especially the malignant kind, the chances that they would change are, I would say, slim.
Yeah, rarely on social media does anybody differentiate between what it is that they're actually talking about. They just use the blanketed term. And so everything is narcissism. But some of this actually goes back to your own emotional availability. It's also recognizing that there's certain behaviors and things that you don't like. So it's your goals, values, and standards for a relationship with you. And do you know what these things are? And you can be if you're anxious and you're in a relationship with somebody who's secure, and they decide that they don't want to be in a relationship with you, well, now, they must be an avoidant. They must be a narcissist because they set a boundary and they pulled away from me and they don't want to be in this relationship. So it has to be this thing. And we get to this place where we have to make the other person the bad object in that scenario so that myself can feel good about who I am, that I'm not somehow inherently bad or wrong
Right.
because somebody decided they didn't want to be in a relationship with me.
Yeah. And I think when you're looking at social media, take it with a Himalayan salt lamp sized grain of salt. Like there's so many unqualified.
I would say an impact crater size.
Yes. Buy a 20-pound bag at Costco. Seriously. There are so many people who are not qualified to be speaking about it with any authority, who speak about it with like ultimate authority and are not trained clinicians, right? That's a big differentiator. And I'm not saying it's like the word Voldemort. You can't say it unless you're a therapist. There's no basic, you have to have those kinds of qualifications to be able to speak about it in a diagnostic sense. And somebody could claim that somebody's a narcissist. Okay, I've never assessed them or evaluated them. I don't know. And even if you're looking at the classic diagnostic criteria, they were created, they have updates every now and then, but there does need to be more updates on that. And I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who are narcissists with the personality disorder. There are. That the reason why we have an ability to write about it is because it exists in people, but it's not as prevalent as people think. Sometimes that could be reporting bias because they're not coming into treatment. We only have the sample size we have. You have to look at like third variable problems as well. But for the most part, it's not as common as people think, because if you're the one who's hurt by them, you're more likely to do the diagnosing, and putting that in quotes. Whereas if you are the one doing the hurt, chances are if somebody brought it to your attention and you had empathy, you're probably not a narcissist. You may be self-involved or self-absorbed and get defensive, but if you can in some way be like, oh my gosh, I hurt that person, it's not likely that you're a narcissist. If you look at it and go, good, that's what I wanted, probably a warning sign. That's just how I would bucket it.
Yeah, but the other part of that is, how are you ever going to really know if they had empathy? You break up, you separate, you might like each other's pictures on social media every once in a while, and for whatever reason you stay connected on the periphery, and you never really know who that person was or their personal experience or what they were all about. You just know how they made you feel in that moment. And it becomes almost like your pride is hurt so badly because you were rejected or abandoned, or this is another word that we love, discarded in that process. People love to use that word. And I get to this place where I'm like, what if you started using different words to explain the ending of a relationship?
We have a whole vocabulary out there, and that's not the right word for it.
How much more empowered would you be? Maybe they didn't discard you. You were just incompatible.
No, but then
and that's okay.
I take accountability for my part in this, and then I don't get to be the victim. And then we're just two people who didn't work. So you have to ask yourself that too. What kind of
sounds so much cleaner and simpler and easier.
Right? What narrative do you want? I want the woe is me that I felt that, look, I dated somebody clinic, like I was told this person, he's going to kill you if you stay. That's how serious this was. So I had to get out. I don't sit here years later and be like, I was a victim. I don't do that. Did I date somebody? You'll trust me. You would know what it feels like to be discarded, because a true narcissist follows the same exact script with everybody they date. They follow the same timeline. They take you to the same date nights. They follow what works because they know people will fall for it. And when you become wise to their ways, they will discard you. You will have flying monkeys. You will be discredited. There's a smear campaign. There is a system to it. That's why also it fits in a nice diagnostic box. That is separate from, again, incompatibility, separate from somebody saying, I don't think this is going to work, separate from somebody being like, hey, our boundaries aren't compatible. That isn't being discarded. Someone choosing consciously not to be with you or initiating a breakup does not automatically equate to being discarded. When you are giving to them, when you are in a relationship, when you feel blindsided, when they are having multiple affairs, what have you, depending on the kind of narcissism, and you start to peek in and you're like, but wait a second, you said this and then you did this, like all of it starts to crumble down in front of you, and you confront them, and then they make you feel like you're crazy and they gaslight you. That is when they discard you, because you're getting too close to, again, that fragile ego state underneath that narcissistic self-structure. And anybody who gets too close has to be thrown away. So that is a totally different system. Like the discard process for somebody who has that disorder is a different system than, we are no longer compatible. I don't want to be this anymore. I don't want to get in a relationship. I thought I did, but I didn't. Like, that's not being, you could feel discarded without it actually being discarded. And I think that's right. What, to your point, it's empowering to use more accurate language, which might also be you looking inward at yourself and being like, in what ways did I contribute to this? I'm not victim blaming or shaming here.
No, can't do that.
Can't say that, but you do have to take a look at what part did I play in both the rise and demise of this relationship.
And if you can get there and begin to accept those parts of yourself, you become more capable, competent, and confident in who you are as a person. And then you also start dating differently as well, because that leans into your vetting process. You get better at that entire system that you've created for yourself. You begin to see the things that you like and that you dislike, and you begin to trust your intuition all at the same time. And what a beautiful thing that is when you begin to trust yourself enough to recognize when something is not for you.
Definitely. I think that's very well put.
Thank you. Thank you all for tuning into today's episode of Talia Tuesday on the Blueprint Podcast with Talia Bombola. Remember, building confidence, self-love, and assertiveness is a journey, and each step you take brings you closer to your goals. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful conversations and practical tips to support your personal growth, and head over to my Stand store to sign up for the 21-day self-love challenge. On sale now, and you can also drop a question for Talia and I for the podcast. Until next time, keep embracing your strengths, asserting your boundaries, and living authentically. Take care, and we'll see you next Tuesday on the Blueprint Podcast.